Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. So a while ago, a commenter asked a very good question that he disguised strategically as a noob question. He said, since archers don't cost food, does that make it easier to maintain build production when going archers? And someone responded, yes, and also to click up faster to the next age. So I'm going to go ahead and tackle this question and also deal with the response that he got as well, because I think that's also a very interesting point. And this is not a noob question at all. It's actually a very good one and definitely warranting a video. Let's go ahead and dive right in and try to analyze this question. So first off, I just want to say that it seems very intuitive that making archers would lead to easier build production and a faster castle age. And there's a very good reason to think like that, because when you're going for archers, you're not spending your food on military units. The only thing that's going to cost food is potentially fletching and maybe armor. So at most you're paying 200 food when going for an archer rush, and then maybe you got like 1 or 2 spears in addition, but that's probably topic for another day. Here we're going to assume you're just playing archers and your job is to get archers from 1 or 2 range, and you probably want to pick up fletching, which is pretty standard, and potentially archer armor from the blacksmith. So at most 200 food, minimum 100 food for fletching. But obviously the good news is, besides that, we're not going to be spending any food on military. So that seems like a good deal. All right, just 100 food, fletching maybe another 100, and that's it. Okay, we should be able to get the castle age pretty quickly. Definitely we're going to get faster than the guy going men at arms or than a guy going scouts, because those guys are paying hard-earned food on their military units. So they're almost guaranteed to be slowed down, and getting build production is certainly going to be harder for them. This is what I would consider the very intuitive thinking, and this feels very logical. It almost feels like there shouldn't be a problem with thinking like this, but as it turns out, there is a little bit more nuance to the topic. It's not like this thinking or this line of thought is bad. That's actually true. Like, not spending food on military, generally speaking, leads to easier build production, and it also leads to getting faster uptimes. That's a general rule, but there is a little bit more to consider. So most of the time, we will send vills to different resources and to specific resources based on the units we're making. And we always account for villager production unless we're going for some kind of all-in or degenerate strategy. That's like a general rule when it comes to feudal age gameplay. So for example, if we're going to go for archers, it takes 4 vills on gold to account for 1 range. It's actually 3.5, but we can't cut a vill in half, so usually we throw 4. And when it comes to 2 ranges, we usually throw 7. And that also usually accounts for the 50 gold that fletching costs. So let's say we're doing 2 range archers, we'd have to throw 7 on gold pretty early in feudal age, which means that we're not going to have those 7 vills on food or wood. Now, when comparing archers and scouts in this scenario, just to keep it simple, we use those 2 strategies as the poster boys of, one as the no food unit and one as the food only unit. When going archers versus going scouts, the archer player would have to go 7 on gold, and the scout player would have those 7 on food instead. Both strategies, as it turns out, take a similar amount on wood, because in the case of the archers, you'd be making less farms, but your unit costs wood, and you have to also make an extra range. And in the case of scouts, you'd be not spending your wood on the unit, but you need to make more farms to get the food. So you'd be making, you'd be spending your wood on the farms. So therefore, even with the 1 stable, not the 2 ranges, just the 1 stable costs half, you still need to make those farms, and those kind of cost a lot of wood. And that's the only way to support the 80 food cost of the scout. So in both cases, you need a similar amount on wood, which turns out to be anywhere from like 8 to 10. Okay. So then we're just comparing the 7 vills on gold for the archer strategy with the mining camp compared to the scouts throwing all the 7 vills on food. So you probably get where I'm going with this. Both strategies will account for a minimum vills on food to make villagers. The archer player would always have something like minimum 6 on food via berries, via sheep, via 1 or 2 farms, and then they'd make sure they have 7 on gold. If they don't do that, they're not making vills and they're falling behind by default. So the assumption has to be that they're doing that for a fact, and then they're going to be accounting for their gold vills. The scout player will naturally want a lot on food, so he's always going to have the 6 vills on food accounted for to be able to maintain vill production from 1 town center. And so the other 7 villagers that are going to be, instead of going to gold, going into food, will be pure food profit that we will initially sink into making scouts, but later on that's going to be an extra 7 vills on food. They're going to be getting us more and more food to be able to get to the castle age. So with the case of maintaining vill production or making it easier to maintain vill production, I would argue that this is kind of a neutral point. Both strategies should always account for villager production, so I wouldn't say that going archers makes it easier to maintain vill production. As a matter of fact, the one strategy that allows you to cut villager production in the feudal age and still be able to win the game is the all-in archer rush, which is otherwise called the Tati rush. We see that sometimes in team games where a player would go up really fast, something like 17 or 18 pop, and he'd go right away 2 range archers with a blacksmith really fast for fletching. By doing a strategy like that, he is cutting his vill production, but he's trading it for fast fletching and really rapid archer production. So in this case, he's going to be lacking in the vill department, but it's justified. So as it turns out, perhaps a bit counterintuitive intuitively, the one build order that's still really strong, but that requires cutting villager production is actually the archer one, and it's not the scout one. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very safe to say that both strategies should always account for vill production in a standard game. And so going archers doesn't make it easier to make vills, and going scouts does not make it easier. Both should have it accounted for, and that is dealt with. Now for the case of faster uptimes. This is also something that will be maybe not as straightforward as you'd expect it to be, and it's along the same kind of logic as well. So when it comes to faster uptime, making food units should slow you down, and making gold units should, in theory, speed you up. And the reason for this is that Castlage costs 800 food and only 200 gold. So you don't need that much gold, you need a lot of food. And getting food is actually the slowest resource in the game, because you have to get first wood, then you have to make the farms, then you have to get food. If you had like a magic boar under your TC with infinite res, they can just throw 10 vills on, and you just have like them gather like normally, just gathering food for indefinite period of time. Then getting the 800 food is actually not a big task at all. But because you have to make the farms, you can't just like randomly get 800 food. It takes a long time to make the farms, have them pay off, and then ultimately get the 800 food for the click. And this is why a lot of times in my coaching and my guides and my Patreon videos, I'm always insisting, like borderline annoyingly insisting, of making those farms as soon as you have the 60 wood when going for scouts, and even when you have the time when you're going for archers, because the faster you make the farm, the faster you get the food in, and the faster you're able to get to that 800 food threshold for Castlage. Now in the case of archers, we already established that you need 7 immediately to gold upon hitting feudal age, which means you're going to be 7 vills slower to getting to food. The scouts player, although he's going to be spending that food initially on scouts, he's going to be up 7 farms on you from the start of feudal age, or from the very few minutes of feudal age. And so when he needs the 200 gold, he would just spend the last 5 to 8 vills on gold, and he'll be able to pick up that 200 gold just before hitting the 800 food threshold, and he'll be on his way. Whereas the archer player starts with the gold, then has to make the transition of food, and it's a lot slower because you have to make the farms first, and then the food starts going up. It's a lot slower of a process than just chucking like 8 vills on gold and letting them gather the 150 you need to get up to the Castlage. So once again, in this case, assuming the scout player isn't going, very scouts happy in the feudal age, isn't going like bloodlines, armor forging, like, very heavy scouts, assuming he's just making like 5 to 6 scouts, which is standard for a scout rush, I would say that the scout player should actually be up to Castlage faster. And it turns out that it's quite even. It's very close, like the guy going 2 range archers or even 1 range archers fast sledging compared to the guy going 1 stable scouts. It turns out it's quite close who gets up to the Castlage faster. But if you compare team games, it's usually the pocket player going scouts that's going to get up to the Castlage faster. And the only way that the archer player can actually catch up is by using the market, and specifically selling stone to buy some food. And the reason why the archer player needs to resort to this is that the archer player is obviously slower to make the farms, and the market just gives you a tool to quickly transform other resources into food. Normally you're always going to be like 200 food shy. You have 600 food, scout players already at like 800, about to click. Archer player drops a market, and instead of dropping like 3-4 farms at a market costs and then waiting for those farms to generate food, you just drop a market, sell stone, bam, buy 200 food. Instant, it's quick, it's not efficient long term, but it's quick and it does the trick, and it gets you up to Castlage. Unfortunately, this method has actually been nerfed quite significantly lately, and they made the cost of food a lot more expensive. So while this strategy is still viable, it's a lot harder to use in recent times, and I would say that it just kind of tipped the favor even more into the favor of the scouts into knights player. As it turns out, it's not as straightforward as saving food equals good for vill production and good for fast castle, or good for a faster castle. It's actually a more important factor is the farms timing. That's really what determines the faster uptime. The vills, in conclusion, we can just say that most of the time vill production is always accounted for, and that 800 food, that big tag on the Castlage, makes it so farms early are so much more valuable than saving your food and not spending it on military or upgrades. And lastly, I just want to say that for whatever reason, it ends up being a very balanced subject. Like the archer player gets, assuming he's going to go 2 range archers in feudal age, he gets a stronger force after the first few minutes. So the scouts player usually gets a couple minutes where he's got the stronger army, he gets the pressure. Then the archer player would get the stronger army, forcing the scouts player to then tech into skirms, because that's the only way you're going to be able to deal with mass archers. Otherwise, you'd have to go either 2 stable scouts with armor and bloodlines, or you have to go skirms, or you have to like stonewall or like mass house wall, and all of those things will slow you down. And so it ends up being a very, very well balanced relationship relationship between the scav player and the archer player, which is why these two strategies are the most popular on the rank ladder. I'm going to quickly tackle the case of the men-at-arms here, and the reason why men-at-arms are so out of the meta at the moment is not just because the unit itself is slow and a bit too easy to counterplay with quick walls and whatnot, but it's also just the unit that single-handedly slows you down the most. Because if you think about the standard men-at-arm build, you're making men-at-arms, which is a food unit, but you also have to get to gold and make a mining camp, which slows down your farming. So men-at-arms gets the worst of both scenarios. It's a food unit which saps your food, and it's also a gold unit that requires you to slow down your farm production, which is why going men-at-arms will almost always guarantee you have the slower castle time unless you get massive damage, which is why I label men-at-arms as a very risky strategy and a strategy that only pays off if you get the damage done. Obviously, I've already covered in depth, why men-at-arms are not seen play in today's meta, but I think this is a very important note that's very fitting with the theme of this video and definitely worth mentioning. All right, that's about all I have for this video. It was a very good question and a very solid and logical response from the other guy as well in the comments, and I love to see those interactions with people kind of getting in on the discussion and helping each other out, and I hope I can shine some light onto this topic and kind of clarify things in a more in-depth manner with this video. All right, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to jump into the discussion in the comments below if you guys have anything to add to this discussion, or maybe a whole other comment that can spark a reaction for another video. We'll see, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to like the video and subscribe, and if you guys want more content from me, check me out on Patreon for the exclusive guides and content as well as the build orders, and if you guys want to see me live, check me out on Twitch. Links to both Twitch and Patreon in the description below. And as always, have a great rest of your evening, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.